In a shocking upset, the Conservatives came out victorious in yesterday's Toronto by-election, winning a riding that the Liberals had held for more than 30 years. It's a result that not even the top advisor to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre predicted.
Well, I think a strong showing for us is going to be, I think you're going to see that we've done better than what we have in the past. We knew it was tough going into, but I think that this will be this will probably stay on the Liberal side of things.
Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland called the result disappointing, but says it's a loss the Liberals are taking seriously.
We know that things are hard for people in Canada, and we know we have to work even harder, delivering for Canadians, winning back the trust of Canadians. That's what we're all committed to do.
To break down the results of this shocking by-election, David Coletto is the CEO and founder of Abacus Data, and Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. David, I'm going to start with you. Karina Gould told us the Liberals are ready to listen to the message from voters. What is your sense of what the message was?
I think I want change, and what you've been doing hasn't been working to solve the problems I'm feeling in my life, I think is the main message coming from the Toronto St. Paul's by-election last night. And frankly, the polls that we've been doing, all of us, for the last year, that's been saying very much the same thing. Voters are looking for change. They're unhappy with the state of the world and the state of their place in it. And right now, many of them either blame or not necessarily blame, but don't think the federal government and the Liberals have done enough to help alleviate those things.
Now, Shachi, David did not say Justin Trudeau in that sentiment, but I wonder, what is your sense of how much this comes down to the Prime Minister himself?
So this is where it's really interesting. But first of all, I went a little bit bug-eyed when you talked about what Karina Gould said, because, like, really? She wants to learn what the message is. The message has been screamed, to David's point, for the better part of a year. And it is something different. It is change. Now, in terms of was this a vote against Justin Trudeau? Was this a referendum on Justin Trudeau? Obviously, when you've got 44% turnout for a summer by-election in a Liberal stronghold, it was very much a repudiation and a spanking of not only the party, but the leader. It can't be read any other way. But now, as we go into okay, what's next? And as the Liberals look to regroup and figure out what's next, you know, the chattering classes have been talking for weeks, and certainly in the lead up to this by-election, that if it was a loss for the Liberals, then the PM would be under some pressure to leave. The problem is this. The people who elected the Conservatives in Toronto St. Paul's, they're Conservative voters. They're never coming back to the Liberals, at least not in the short term. And changing, we have data. I've looked at data that shows it doesn't matter whether Trudeau stays or goes. They're not coming back under any circumstance. So now the Liberals have to focus on the available voters that are there for them. And these are soft Liberal voters who haven't left yet. They are looking at the NDP. They are looking at other options. And we say, look, what gives? Why are you unhappy? What we hear from them is that it's not necessarily about the leader. It's about the lack of progress on the issues that they care most about. And so changing, the person at the top, changing brands at this stage isn't necessarily going to help them sort of consolidate what's left of that vote.
David, we referenced in that interview with Karina Gould some of your analysis about what this trend would mean if we saw such a big vote swing across the province. Can you walk us through what you found?
Yeah, so I worked with our friend Eric Grenier, who did a model to basically say if we saw a 25-point swing, which is what we saw last night in Toronto St. Paul, away from the Liberals to the Conservatives, what would that mean across Ontario? So we only looked at Ontario ridings under the new map. And the conclusion was that 55 Liberal MPs or candidates, if they were to run in those ridings, would lose ridings that they currently hold. And those are ridings across the GTA, most of Ottawa, most of the smaller cities across the province, as well as many other 416 ridings like Eglinton Lawrence, which is right beside Toronto St. Paul's, would go Conservative. And the Liberals would be left with a smaller number of seats in Ontario, even though there will be more seats in Ontario than after the 2011 election. Now, there's a lot of assumptions built into that, but what it shows is it maybe can't get any worse than it did last night in Toronto St. Paul's. But even if it gets a little bit better over the next year, dozens and dozens of Liberal incumbents are in deep trouble. And that's just Ontario. I think the same would be true for those in Atlantic Canada and in British Columbia as well.
Before we go back to Shachi, David, I just wonder, do you share her analysis that it doesn't matter whether Trudeau stays or goes, that this is ultimately, sort of a big problem that the Liberals have to face no matter what?
Oh, I agree with the research that the findings that she has. I think that when you ask Canadians, would anything change your view? They say no. But what I'm not sure about is how a change in leader, or at least an announcement from Trudeau, let's say hypothetically that he's not going to run again, what does that do to the conversation? And that's something I think research has a very hard time predicting, right? That hypothetical. Because right now people are so focused on what they don't like about Mr. Trudeau, what they don't like about the Liberals, that I don't even know if they can imagine a world without him, because he's been Prime Minister for so long. So I'm not of the view that the Liberals can never come back from this and that a new leader won't change things. But I do agree that maybe it's not as steep a climb as if it was just with Mr. Trudeau alone, but it's still a very steep climb for the Liberals, no matter who would be leader.
Shachi, what does the research tell us about potential replacements, be it individuals or sort of the characteristics folks are looking for?
So one of the things that the Conservatives clearly have on their side right now is enthusiasm and momentum. They want to show up for Pierre Poilievre. They're excited to do that. And at best, what a change at the top could do for existing Liberal voters is reinvigorate the party, reinvigorate fundraisers, volunteers, people who want to be still associated with the Liberal brand and say, hey, now we've got that fighting chance that David just talked about. It's still a very steep hill to climb, but maybe, it puts a bit of spring in their step. That's the good news. The bad news is that it really doesn't change much, again, for soft voters or for kind of maybe Liberal voters among that group. And those are the people, I can't underscore this enough. These are the people the Liberals need to bring back into the tent. Those who have slipped over to the NDP, those at risk of staying home, saying that they don't know until the last minute, and then just not casting a ballot. When we test names like Chrystia Freeland, Mark Carney, Mark Miller, others, there's a whole list of them. Go to angusreid.org and have a look at it. What we find is that among those soft, uncommitted Liberal voters, it's not really the thing that locks them in. Changing those faces or those names, there's no one person. And so much of the conversation, Catherine, is around like, oh, if only it was so-and-so. This person could be the savior. That person could be the savior. What we find is there is no real clear savior who's got enough momentum or interest to grow out the base that exists. And that's what the Liberals desperately need to do if they have any hope of not being wiped out.
Interesting. David, I do want to ask you about this protest vote. 84 names on the ballot, a lot of them tied to protest candidates who are calling for electoral reform. If you add up their votes, it's more than the margin of victory. Do you think that changed the outcome?
It might have, maybe the confusion of it, but I think we're getting lost. I'm not one who believes that if the Liberals won last night by one vote, the story's the same in my mind, is that they, one safe Liberal seat is no longer a safe seat. So I'm not sure if it may have changed the outcome, but I don't think it changes the implications of the vote itself. And so, it's hard to say. Some voters may have voted for anyone who wasn't one of the main parties or a listed party anyways. They just dispersed across multiple names.
Shachi, in closing, I will just ask you, we always hear about by-elections. How much can we read into by-elections? Mm-hmm. What should the takeaway message be for folks about what this means for the next general election?
In this case, there are occasional by-elections that do seem to portend or foretell something bigger and stronger. How many of us went to bed last night, tucked up, looking at that, what looked at the time like a margin of victory for the Liberals that was tight? And I remember thinking, well, gosh, okay, the conversation's going to be how they scraped one out, and what does that portend? What does that mean? In this case, the Conservatives showed up, they pulled their vote, they flipped the script, and I think that is a big thing that we should be reading into their level of election readiness. If they could poll vote in what has traditionally been a Liberal stronghold, and look at the ways they're going to be prepared to poll vote in marginal seats in all of the places that they need to win. I think that's what we need to be looking at just as much as polling.
Okay. Thank you both so much for this conversation. David Coletto, Shachi Kurl.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks, Catherine.